All right. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about famous people that were killed by their doctors. And this is actually based on a video that I made a few years ago. It was called 10 Celebrities Killed by Their Doctors. And actually there was 11 people in it, just two of them were very similar. And for this one I've added one more person. Now I just actually finished taking that video and turning it into clips for Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And I ended up doing quite a bit more research on each of these cases, and I actually caught a couple of mistakes that I made, minor mistakes. I left a lot of detail out of that video because I was trying to just keep it under 15 minutes. I was actually trying to do YouTube at that point. It did not work out, but I realized that the devil is in the details, so we're going to dive quite a bit deeper today. And in the last 3.5 years or so since this video, I have upgraded my education big time in the health field, so I do feel a little bit more qualified to speculate a little bit on what actually might have been the causes of each one of these cases and what could have been done about it given what was known at the time that this happened, because some of these are quite far back in history. So given what was available to them, what could have been done differently? And I think we can jump right in. I appreciate you for being here with me. Let's do this. Starting all the way back with number 12 here on this list, Charles the Bad, or Charles II of Navarre. This is back in 1387. Navarre is on the Spanish-French border, close to Andorra, basically in the Pyrenees Mountains. And there's actually two different accounts of what happened here, but the first one is Charles the Bad, having fallen into such a state of decay that he could not make use of his limbs, consulted his physician, who ordered him to be wrapped up from head to foot in a linen cloth impregnated with brandy, so that he might be enclosed in it to the very neck as a sack. It was night when this remedy was administered. One of the female attendants of the palace, charged to sew up the cloth that contained the patient, having come to the neck, the fixed point where she was to finish her seam, made a knot according to custom, but as there was still remaining an end of thread, instead of cutting it as usual, she had recourse to the candle, which immediately set fire to the whole cloth. Being terrified, she ran away and abandoned the king, who was thus burnt alive in his own palace. So basically, his doctors said, wrap him up in a cloth, sew it all the way up to his neck, and soak it in brandy. And instead of cutting the last thread on it, the female attendant used a candle, and obviously it set fire. It's a cloth soaked in alcohol. So it burned him to death. And the second account is quite similar. It's just that instead of the whole candle to cut the thread story, it's just that he was left close to a pan of hot coals. And that little fire, that little coal pan, caught him on fire. The essence of the story is the same. He was burned alive in this cloth sack soaked in alcohol. In the first story, it was brandy. In the second story, it was wine. Now, it really is not clear why Charles the Bad was sick in the first place. It could have been disease. It also could definitely have been poisoning. He was known for scheming, murdering, and double dealing, and he actually was said to be a hugely unsuccessful king. His negotiations basically failed. He wasn't a good politician. So he had lots of enemies. He couldn't stop the Spanish from invading his lands. And so, to me, he probably was poisoned, but again, very little information here. The other cases we have more information on, so I can't speculate too much about what was actually going on with his health or what could have been done for him. But I do know that sewing him up in a sack and soaking it with alcohol and having fire nearby, whether it's a candle or a pot of coals, is a terrible idea, and that's obviously his cause of death. It doesn't appear that he was infirm when this happened, so he was still conscious. We don't know how much longer he would have lived, but definitely he died on this day because of this specific medical treatment. And this is one of the weirdest cases of medical malpractice here that we've got on the list. I have no idea why they thought this would do anything. Pretty unprecedented to me. But we'll leave it on that, and we'll move on to number 11, which is Napoleon. Napoleon the First, the famous Napoleon. Now, Napoleon died at 51 years old in 1821. He was in exile on St. Helena, and he was getting progressively worse. He He had all kinds of complaints, but especially about his stomach and his constipation. Now, Napoleon wasn't a particularly health-conscious person, but he also wasn't that bad. He reportedly liked simple meals. He liked roasted chicken and boiled beef, soups, eggs, potatoes, pasta, and he usually drank his wine diluted with water. Remember, in these times, a lot of people never drank water. They drank wine or some other distilled thing because of pathogens in the water. They didn't really have clean water. He was a workaholic. He was clearly more interested in politics and war than he was in health. But again, he wasn't that bad. They didn't have vaccines back then. They didn't have processed food, all the agricultural chemicals and all this stuff. He didn't have any of that. So he most likely did have a stomach ulcer. Whether it was cancerous or not, that's up for debate. He had insomnia and gout, and both of those are in the calcium deficiency category. So it's likely that, to me, that was his main problem, was mineral deficiency. He also had gingivitis, which is another clue of chronic mineral deficiency. So he was degenerating due to that mineral deficiency. And his stomach ulcer, honestly, probably was just due to him being a workaholic. Maybe excess alcohol. I don't know, but a pretty simple syndrome here. And even in his time, he probably could have just lived several more years without actually doing anything at all. But it's pretty clear that his doctors poisoned him to death. That's why he's on this list here. In 2001, French forensic specialists said that tests on Napoleon's hair suggested a major exposure to arsenic, which most likely came from his doctors. Some people have speculated that he was poisoned, non-medical poisoning, but it seems that his doctors are the ones that did it. They were giving him tons of treatments. And this is one of the key points here when it comes to medical malpractice, especially with famous people. Even with normal people, doctors are pressured to do something. I don't pay you not to do anything, doc, right? What am I paying you for? They got to do something. And the problem is, in the 1800s here, 1821, they really only had poisons at their disposal. Even though many things had been known in history about diet, herbs, essential oils, all kinds of what we would call natural or alternative treatments, they were well known by this time. Regular medical doctors did not use them, for the most part. And the more famous you are, the more important you are, the more your doctors are actually going to try to save you. And again, in this case, in this time, it was mostly poisons that they had in their toolbox. He was given regular doses of antimony potassium tartrate, which is a poisonous colorless salt which was used to make him vomit. And he was also given regular enemas. Enemas are going to come up here again on this list. I have no idea why they thought enemas would be appropriate here, why they would work. I'm not entirely against enemas, especially coffee enemas, but in this case, for an ulcer and insomnia and gout, an enema will be absolutely useless. I think he should have been given pearl powder, which was available in his time, bone broth, bone meal, because calcium deficiency is his primary problem here. And on St. Helena, there was plenty of seafoods and shells and all kinds of stuff that could have been used. They could have ground up oyster shells into a fine powder and mixed that into his food. That probably would have reversed the gout. And rather than drinking diluted wine all the time, he could have drank coconut water. St. Helena is a tropical island. They could have drank coconut water. And even though there wasn't a patent on a desalination process yet, desalination has been known for millennia. They could have used desalination to give him clean drinking water so he didn't need to drink so much alcohol, which was probably massively exacerbating his calcium deficiency. That might even be the prime cause. Because other than that, like I said, his diet is pretty good. Yes, he had some pasta. Not the biggest deal, all things considered. He seemed like a pretty stressed out guy, too. He wasn't very chill. Like, he was pretty obsessed with this politics stuff and staying up all night writing letters. And he could have chilled out a bit. That would have helped him. But clean water, some extra minerals, he probably would have been fine. And giving him emetics, which is something used to induce vomiting, that's not a good idea at all. And by giving him these enemas and emetics, he would have created even further mineral deficiencies, especially potassium. So he could have been developing rapid heartbeats and just overall making him feel worse because he's basically dehydrated. They're causing him to be more dehydrated with these emetics and with these enemas. And it's said that the final straw is likely to have been a 600 milligram dose of mercuric chloride given as a purge to clear his intestines 2 days before his death. This was 5 times the normal dose and would have depleted his potassium still further. Add that in with the arsenic that they'd been giving him. He was basically doomed. And in this case, honestly, I don't think we have to do much speculation. If they had just left him alone, he probably would have been fine, at least for several more years. He did have all kinds of these minor complaints, but wasn't that bad. And it is disputed whether he had actual stomach cancer or not. Autopsies were not that precise in that day. And though I do put the blame on the doctors here, it is worth noting that Napoleon, including other French aristocrats at his time, also wore arsenic-based face and hair powder. And there could have also been arsenic in the water supply, in the wallpaper covering Napoleon's bedchamber, in the coal smoke heating his chamber, and so on. Materials used in everyday living were not very safe. And by the way, one of the main treatments I think he could have been offered for his constipation and for his ulcers would have been cabbage juice. Cabbage juice has been used in ancient cultures like Greeks, Romans, Egyptians. It has a laxative effect and it's mucilaginous, which means it coats the stomach and the intestines in a mucus-like material, basically, which soothes the stomach and the intestines and can help to repair them. There are other herbs and stuff that he could have used, but this is pretty simple stuff. And you can live with an ulcer anyways. It's not deadly. The cancer did not immediately kill him. So that's Napoleon. Let's move on to number 10, Anna Nicole Smith. And Anna Nicole Smith, honestly, the main reason she's on this list is because I wanted at least one woman on the list. There is a few others I could have chosen, but she's a pretty famous case here, and this is in the modern time. She died in 2007, so basically everything that we know about in alternative health and medicine was completely available to her, and her main problem was addiction to prescription medications, and her official cause of death is overdose. And it did seem like she had a bit of an eating disorder. She had said that she can't stop eating, and clearly if you look at pictures of her throughout her life, she gained more and more weight. I do think this is because of mineral deficiency primarily, causing her to overeat. The body's hungry for minerals, and if you don't give them the minerals, it just keeps you hungry. She just kept eating. And she did take weight loss pills, which wouldn't have helped. Would have made the situation worse. Especially the ephedra, which was banned a year after her death in 2008. She took laxatives and dieted very heavily. Well, the laxatives would have made her lose even more minerals because as you purge more out of the system, more water and water-soluble nutrients go with it, especially the key minerals, potassium, magnesium, calcium, salt. And unfortunately, I don't know which dietitians or whatever that she consulted, but nobody told her to get off the gluten, or she didn't listen. Apparently her favorite foods were mashed potatoes and gravy, pizza but not the crust, fried bologna and cheese, biscuits, burgers, and pickles. Well, pickles are a bit of a sign of mineral deficiency. It's pretty commonly known, especially pregnant women craving pickles. The mashed potatoes I don't have a problem with, but the gravy was most likely made with gluten flour. Pizza, even if you don't eat the crust, obviously is made with flour. There were no gluten-free pizzas on the market at that time, and she was not gluten-free. Fried bologna is not good because it's fried, but I don't think that was her core problem here. I think it was the gluten intolerance. And even though she did enjoy home-cooked meals, again, it's mostly just gluten here. Apple strudel. Strudel is gluten. And she was only 39 years old, so despite her relatively minor health problems here, she had plenty of time to turn it around if it wasn't for all the drugs she was on. And of course, who's giving her prescription drugs? Doctors. This was her key problem here. And the excuse might have been her psychological diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Now, BPD is a pretty messy disorder, But to me, it's not actually the biggest deal. I was actually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And I don't disagree with the diagnosis. I had all of the symptoms, including a long-term pattern of significant relationship instability, a distorted sense of self, and intense emotional responses. Borderline people frequently exhibit self-harming behaviors and engage in risky activities, can suffer from a feeling of detachment from reality, a pervasive sense of emptiness, and an acute fear of abandonment. And the biggest risk with BPD is actually suicide, which is very common for BPD people to have depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, and suicidal tendencies. And yeah, I did have all of these things. And the problem with BPD is that it's pretty poorly controlled with pharmaceutical drugs. They've tried to use many different drugs for this, and they usually do not show much results at all. I was given every antidepressant on the market, antipsychotics, all kinds of things. None of them helped at all. They just made me feel like a zombie. Because borderline is not caused by a drug deficiency. In my opinion, it is a nutritional problem. When I got on the nutrients, the problem did not go away right away. My pains and aches and cramps and twitches, all that stuff did go away. My insomnia went away, but I was still left with all these mental symptoms. I did need to gain a sense of purpose through my work. I did need to actively work on my relationships because I had sabotaged most of my relationships before this point. I did not know how to be a good friend or son or brother. I had to put effort into those things. Therapy did not help, by the way. Books did not help. I read books on the subject and all that stuff. Cognitive behavioral therapy did help me quite a bit. And I do think that cognitive behavioral therapy is the most effective form of therapy when it comes to actual psychological disorders. And cognitive behavioral therapy has been known for a long time. It's well known by 2007. You basically just chart out, you write out all the things that you negatively respond to, all your bad thoughts. Nobody loves me, nobody wants me, I'm worthless, all this stuff. You write those things down, and then you come up with counter arguments to it. Because one of the big problems with BPD and other psychological disturbances is that you agree with your negative thoughts, right? You have this thought that's like, oh, nobody loves me. And then you come up with more reasons why nobody loves you. That's bad. You do the opposite, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, no, that's not true. Obviously, my friend just called me this morning. Obviously, he cares about me. No, that's not true. My mom loves me. You come up with ways to argue with yourself about that until you no longer agree with your negative thoughts about yourself and you feel better about yourself. And in my case, cognitive behavioral therapy coupled with good nutrition, which genuinely made me feel better, gave me more energy, so thus I could do things that were good for me. Over time, all of my symptoms did disappear. I no longer react with intense emotional responses. I no longer have relationship instability. I've been married. We just had our 3-year anniversary now. My relationships are better than ever with my friends and with my family. It didn't happen overnight. It took work, but there was no way I was going to do that work when I was massively depressed and constantly engaged in self-harming behavior and addictions. I was addicted, and I did all this stuff too. I avoided responsibilities, all this stuff. So usually when you look at borderline personality disorder, it's kind of painted as a forever thing. Like this is part of your personality, hence the name, personality disorder. Well, it's not completely true. You can change it. I no longer feel the emptiness and, the acute depression and suicidal thoughts, all that stuff. It's not an easy thing to turn around, but it is 100% possible. And all of these tools were completely available in 2007 and much before that. If she had had doctors, nutritionists, or anybody that knew anything about this, she would have been much better off. Unfortunately, she saw conventional medical doctors and was given all kinds of different drugs, and all of them could have been avoided. The diet pills could have been avoided. She could have lost weight naturally. Just get off the gluten. Take some vitamins and minerals for your metabolism and some enzymes. Again, none of this is new. This has all been figured out since like the 1960s and 70s, plenty of time. Before she was born, this was all figured out. And she was on at least 4 antidepressants. So clearly this was not working. And one thing that's interesting is that she did actually apparently get vitamin B12 injections. So she wasn't 100% ignorant to nutrition and alternative health. It's just that B12 on its own is going to do hardly anything. And we're pretty much done with Anna Nicole Smith, but I should say that in the history of medicine and medical malpractice, women have definitely gotten the short end of the stick. Even today, women take more pharmaceutical drugs than men. They listen to doctors more than men. They go to doctors more than men. And in part, that's because they care and they're more actively involved with trying to do something about their health. That itself is a good thing, but when society points them towards medical doctors, they really don't get a good deal. And there's a long history of women being treated basically like they're crazy. In fact, the word hysteria or hysterical, right? That root actually comes from uterus, which means woman. So when you say someone is hysterical, that literally means crazy woman. And especially for the last 200 years or so, women have very often been called psychosomatic. It's all in your head. Like you're just a woman, you're just stop it. That's you give her some drugs, cut her uterus out, right? This was a very common procedure. It still is today even. But especially in the past, they would cut your uterus out just to calm you down basically, like a lobotomy for the uterus. And they had this syndrome they used in the past called neurasthenia, which now is pretty much called chronic fatigue syndrome, but neurasthenia was very commonly diagnosed in women, and it often wasn't a diagnosis that was taken very seriously. Again, oh, it's just psychosomatic. It's all in your head. You're just being hysterical. This kind of attitude was pervasive throughout medical history, and it honestly still is to an extent today. Even me, I'm somewhat guilty of this. I never know when people are just being a hypochondriac or not. I don't know, but I'm admitting to you my bias here that sometimes I do think that some of these women, it's usually women, it can happen in men too, but sometimes I think, man, they're just stressing way too much about their health. Another word for it is health anxiety. It's a real thing. People do stress too much about their health. You need to give time for things to work and so on and so on. And I don't want to keep over prescribing things myself, right? If somebody, woman or man, if they keep coming back week after week, well, what else can I add? What else can I do? Often I'm telling them, just calm down, take it slow, let things work. And unfortunately, many medical doctors do not share that attitude, and they just keep prescribing more and more and more drugs until you get a case like Anna Nicole Smith, where she's pumped full of drugs and she dies from it. Many, many other women have fallen prey to the same scam. And that's why she's on this list here at number 10. All right, the next person on this list is another King Charles II. There's lots of King Charleses in history, but this one is basically the opposite of Charles the Bad. He was actually known as the Merry Monarch. He was a happy dude. King Charles II died in 1685 at 54 years old. First, he was King of Scotland, then he was King of England, Scotland, and Ireland until his death. And he was actually responsible for allowing women to act. Right before this, women were not allowed to be actors. And I'm not sure if that's the first in the world or just the first in England, but I think it's the first in the world. He loved women, this guy. He had tons of mistresses, hosted orgies and all this stuff. So he liked to let women do whatever they wanted, including act and do other things. He lifted restrictions on entertainment, and he wasn't a Puritan, basically. So his subjects would have been able to enjoy themselves more under his reign. And his situation is pretty similar to Napoleon, actually. The only references to his foods that I could find were that he liked fruit, he liked eggs, he liked salads, surprisingly, and his favorite food was said to be ambergris, which is actually whale vomit. I know it sounds weird. It's a solid, waxy, flammable substance that comes from the digestive systems of sperm and pygmy sperm whales. And this was eaten in his time, but now it's most commonly used in perfumes. It's used to stabilize perfumes. And if anything, I think this might actually have helped his digestion. It's kind of like a bile supplement today. So I don't think that had anything to do with his death. And although the foods that he liked were healthy, he probably did overindulge. That's kind of one of the main things that he's known for. He loved pleasure. He loved having big, huge dinner parties. He might have overeaten. Some people on this list are known for not eating very much food, but Charles II here probably ate a fair bit of food. and he probably drank a lot of alcohol. Again, most people in this time didn't really drink water. Even kids would have been given like kids' beer. This is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They would have been drinking alcohol practically all day. And maybe some coffee. Coffee was already introduced to England at this time. But both of those things dehydrate you and they make you lose minerals. And he did have gout, which is a form of arthritis, basically calcium deficiency. The alcohol would not have helped that. Coffee would not have helped that. And maybe excess grains. Again, I'm not sure how much food this guy ate overall. And the grains in the food supply back then would have been much better. There was no mechanical pulverization of grains, which is one of the big problems today. Everything would have been harvested traditionally on small farms all throughout England. I'm just calling it England, by the way, the whole England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. I'm just calling it England. They didn't have mega farms back then. These are family farms. They would have cut the grains one day and then come back the next day, or even as late as a week later, to go and harvest the grain stalks. And actually, this is a key thing here. And people say, well, why were grains healthier in the past? First of all, there's been digestion problems ever since there's been agricultural society. As far back as we have writing, there's been stomach problems, respiratory problems, etc., which I would attribute, in part at least, to the consumption of grains. But several things were different. Obviously, there was no genetic modification. There was no processed sugar to add into the breads and stuff. They didn't super pulverize the grains, so it's whole grain here. That matters. And it does also matter that they left it in the fields. Just because it wasn't physically possible to cut the grain and harvest it in the same day. All these cultures, they'd be letting the grain sit there for a couple of days, 1, 2, 10 days. And that would start the grains to ferment and increase the enzymes in the grains. So that would actually make it much easier to digest. And of course, traditionally, breads and cookies and stuff, puddings, they weren't just flour, sugar, egg. All of these grains would have been rough milled with a water mill or an animal mill. You know, an oxen walks around in a circle, pulls a wheel, grinds up the grains, but it's very rough. So all the components of the grains are in there. And most of the nutrients would have been intact from that type of milling process. Also, they would have used ash to stretch the flour. Talking about white ash here at the center of the fire pits. White ash would stretch flour and it would add flavor. And of course, it would add minerals as well. This is worth the detail, by the way, understanding how breads used to be made and why they're so much worse now, and why I can't really blame grains for King Charles's problem, which we'll get to. So they would have added ash. They would have added spices, herbs, probably fruit and even vegetables or both, and maybe even meat, believe it or not, in bread, old bread recipes. They'd use all kinds of stuff. And all those ingredients are healthy, even though there is some gluten in the grain still. It would be balanced out at least a little bit by all these extra ingredients. And one extra key ingredient that they used in not even ancient times, just pre-modern times, they used bones, bone meal, again to stretch the flour. It's difficult to grow grains. It's a lot of work to mill them. So they would stretch flour with ash and bone meal. Remember the old nursery rhyme, Jack and the Beanstalk? Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be he live or be he dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread. They added bone meal to bread. Just making the point, this bread was fortified with minerals. So the bread probably wasn't actually his problem. So at 54 years old, King Charles II, the merry monarch, wakes up to a dreadful shriek and developed convulsions and speechlessness. That could have been a seizure there. His doctors were there, and the first thing they did was bleed him 16 ounces. It's about a pint of blood. Then they cut him and scarified him and blistered him. And here at this time in the 1600s, 1700s, well into the 1800s, blistering means that they breached the skin with an irritant, usually with something called blister beetle or Spanish fly, that was coated on a plaster, and they applied that to the skin, so it caused a blister on the skin. And I guess they thought this would draw out bad humors, demons or something. I don't know. Pretty odd, but it comes up a lot. Blistering. They give him cathartics, which is a purgative. It's going to cause him to have diarrhea, basically. They also gave him enemas. No idea why. This has nothing to do with seizures, in my opinion, or whatever his shriek was. Couldn't have helped at all, in my opinion. They bled him again, another 8 ounces, and this was all before noon. Terrible morning here. By the way, I found at least one reference on Charles II that said he died peacefully on this day. This is anything but peaceful. In the afternoon, they gave him a sacred bitter powder, but the next day, he had another convulsion. The doctors prescribed another sacred tincture hourly, and they gave him some other things, some cream of tartar, which is a potassium acid salt of tartaric acid. And today that's actually used as a stabilizer in baking, basically, to make eggs not stick together. So they add it to cookies and pies and all kinds of processed foods. And even today, some people claim that this might have an effect on arthritis. So this actually might have been a sensible thing for his doctors to use at this time because it's an alkalizing substance. And gout is an acid problem, basically. I would use calcium, magnesium, other minerals. Calcium's the primary alkalizer in nature and in the human body. But cream of tartar, not the craziest thing they did to him here. After that, they bled him another 10 ounces and blistered him again. Gave him a whole bunch of other medicines and herbal stuff like mallow root, barley water, almonds, melon seeds, bark of elm, lavender, powdered pearls. That would have been one of the few calcium supplements available at this time. I think they should have given him bone meal. And yeah, the powdered pearls, not a bad idea here, actually. But all this other stuff, it's hurting him. A couple of things here that might actually have helped him. They gave him lily of the valley, which is a herb, flowers of lime, black cherry water, white wine, senna, manna, chamomile, gentian, it's another herb, it's a flower, nutmeg, followed by spirits of human skull. Yes, that's exactly what you think it is. It's distilled human skulls. I think they powdered it and distilled it in alcohol. I'm not sure. And this was actually used to treat convulsions, according to Pliny the Younger. And they said the ideal skull was to come from a young, healthy person who died violently. I don't know why they had to die violently, as the bones of an older person might contain the illness being treated. And believe it or not, this is another thing that might have actually helped him because it's a source of calcium and other minerals. Bones are a great source of minerals. The next day, this is the third day here, even though I did find one reference that said it took 6 days of treatment for him to die, this more detailed explanation here only gives me 3 days, but whatever. On his third day, he asked to see the light of the rising sun, after which he became acutely breathless and was bled another 12 ounces. His speech failed, he became unconscious, and he died before noon. So it really isn't that clear what was wrong with Charles in the first place. There's always the possibility that they were poisoned. Any king, it's always a possibility that they were poisoned. They did use a lot of poison materials, a lot of metals, they used mercury and arsenic and other poisons as dyes for cloth and rugs and glues for wallpaper. So although most of the toxins available to us in the modern times were not there, like again, he didn't get any vaccines, there was no EMF, there was no pharmaceutical drugs, there was no agricultural pesticides and stuff like that. Still, the average environment in this time, in the 1600s, probably did contain numerous toxins, especially heavy metals. But it is most likely to me that his life of overindulgence really was the cause of his gout and probably his convulsions, his seizures as well. He ate reasonably well, but probably too much of it and probably too much alcohol. And that was honestly probably the main thing. He could have been supplementing with minerals. And yes, believe it or not, they did use certain supplements throughout history. Again, even things like pearl powder and spirits of human skull. And they did have wood ashes. They did use it in their cooking and all that. But he probably just tipped the scales too much with his overindulgence. Today, this would have been very, very easy. I would have gotten him off the gluten, given him some mineral supplements. I would give him all 90 essential nutrients, but especially the calcium and magnesium and their cofactors. Normal program here for us. Would have been simple. His gout would have started to feel better very, very quickly. He probably never would have had a seizure again if that was the case. I would have given him extra omega-3s. I didn't see any references to him eating fish or anything like that. That would have helped. Omega-3 is concentrated in the brain. There are several deficiencies associated with seizures, including magnesium, manganese, pyridoxine, vitamin B6, as well as vitamin E and pantothenic acid, B5, another B vitamin. A lot of nutrients that could be missing when it comes to seizures. And all of these are depleted by alcohol, by the way. B vitamins are depleted, magnesium's depleted. There's vitamin E and selenium, since they have to deal with poisons. Just basically all nutrients are drained by alcohol. Him, to me, is probably mostly the minerals. Just depleted by alcohol. Let's just blame the alcohol. I think that's actually probably the main cause. So just cutting down on the alcohol would have been good. He did have access to clean water. In England and Scotland, there's plenty of springs that he could have drank water, even though most people just didn't. They just drank alcohol. He could have gotten clean water. He could have had desalinated water, which had been used since ancient times. He could have even used the healing springs, some of which are in England, in France, close by. He could have got water from there. He's the king. He can order this done. But if his doctors didn't show up and bleed him profusely, it's a lot of blood loss, which loses even more minerals, right? There's minerals in the blood, and they just purged a bunch of that out. He would have lost even more minerals when they gave him the purgatives and the enemas. And in my opinion, if his doctors had just left him alone, he probably would have been fine. He might have continued having seizures now and then, but if he had just cut down on the alcohol, increased his minerals, that probably would have gone away. Increased his seafood would have been a very good idea. And that's pretty much it. His situation was not dire by any means. He was not that old, 54 years old. He was generally in good spirits. He was well liked. And there was an autopsy performed on him, by the way. A little bit vague here. On the surface of the brain, the veins and arteries were unduly full. The cerebral ventricles were filled with a kind of serous matter. I have no idea what that means, serous matter. The substance of the brain itself was quite soaked with similar fluid. On the right side, the lungs were firmly adherent to the chest wall. The heart was large and firm and quite free from malformation. So I don't know if this means too large, abnormally large. That would have signified selenium deficiency. Selenium, vitamin E, which also this would have been exacerbated by his alcohol. Alcohol seems to be the prime cause here. His lungs were charged with blood. The liver was livid in color or engorged with blood, as were the kidneys and spleen. So I'm not a pathologist. I don't really know what this engorged with blood thing means. Doesn't seem to be a problem to me. Seems like he had alcoholism. That caused the gout. Probably caused the seizures as well. It's a pretty common thing here with alcoholics. And other doctors have debated this for centuries, of course. Most of them believe he had a kidney problem. Again, alcohol, mineral deficiency. And by giving him a range of emetics and purgatives, emetic, by the way, is something that forces you to vomit. Emesis is the Latin name for vomiting. This would have caused acute renal insufficiency, or kidney failure, which would have explained the brain edema, basically, the brain swelling. And just like Napoleon and some other people on the list here, their doctors were probably over-enthusiastic, doing too many treatments all at once. In a case like this, less would have been more. Did not need to do that much. Let him rest. Take the wine away from him. And there's a conclusion here from the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine, Oxford University, that says, it is likely that Charles died from problems that his physicians at the time could not have cured, even had they known what they were and what caused them. However, it is equally likely that they hastened the end when it came. Yeah, he was not going to die that day, most likely. We don't know how much longer he could have lived, but probably a long time, honestly. Probably several years, even if they did nothing. And by the way, they gave him even more treatments here. There's different accounts. They threw a whole bunch of treatments and herbs at him. Too much, too soon, too bad. So let's get to number 8 on this list. President James Garfield. He was the 20th president of the United States. You don't hear very much about him. He had 9 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives before he became president. His presidency was said to be impactful, but cut short after 200 days when he was assassinated. This is the official story. And in this case, we don't need to talk about what Garfield ate, what his habits were, because at 49 years old, he was shot. This is July 2nd, 1881. And most of the people debating this death here seem to agree that modern medicine could certainly have saved the life of James Garfield. And I would say he probably could have been saved in his day as well. This isn't the Stone Age. They had several tools they could have used to fish the bullet out of him and sew him back up. And there was plenty of antiseptic substances that have been used all through history. And that's the key here. Garfield appears to have died from infection, not from the bullet. And keep in mind, a hot bullet is self-sterilizing because it's hot, burns off the germs. But what's not self-sterilizing is your bare fingers. If your doctors go poking around in your wounds without washing their hands because they didn't believe in germs at this time, then that's probably going to cause a serious infection. And Garfield got shot on July 2nd, but he didn't die until September 19th, 1881, over 2 months later. So he didn't die from blood loss. He didn't die from organ failure. He had plenty of time for his wounds to heal without any medicine at all, even without supplements and all this stuff. Just normal healing. A body is a miracle of healing. It would have healed in that time, but not if it's dealing with infections. And even the guy who was hanged for his assassination said, yes, I shot the president, but his physicians killed him. And I agree, and most other people agree. So we can leave this case there. James Garfield almost certainly would not have died if it were not for his doctors playing around inside of him with unclean hands. And on the original video here, I did give an honorable mention to President Abraham Lincoln, because even though he was shot in the head on April 14th, 1865, he didn't die right away. He died the following day, but he was conscious afterwards. And same thing here, his doctors were poking around in his wounds with unclean hands. And unlike Garfield, there is a very small chance that Lincoln would have survived this, but people have survived being shot in the head, being shot in the brain. It has happened. It would have required a miracle, but miracles are possible. All right, now we're back in the modern era for number 7 on this list, Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince. At 57 years old, April 21st, 2016, he died of an accidental overdose. And it was accidental because he didn't mean to buy fentanyl, apparently. Apparently, he bought counterfeit drugs on the street. He was trying to buy hydrocodone, and it was fentanyl. And you might think, well, why am I blaming his doctors for this? Well, because he was under the care of doctors. They're the ones that got him hooked on painkillers in the first place. They're the ones that failed to help his pain. And he never would have become a drug addict if it wasn't for that. So let's back up a little bit. Besides his eventual opiate addiction, he was one of the healthiest rock stars out there. Pop stars, whatever. He was a Jehovah's Witness, so he apparently despised alcohol. And he did have parties after shows, but he wasn't known to use party drugs. And overall, he was described as a lonely, reclusive workaholic. And by the way, we all got a glimpse at his after parties from Charlie Murphy's very famous Chappelle Show skit where Prince and his gang beat Charlie Murphy and Eddie Murphy and their buddies in a basketball game, which is one of the funniest sketches of all time to me.
I dare you to challenge Prince to a game of ball one-on-one. Challenge him!
When that first came out in 2003, I remember crying, laughing. I almost threw up. I laughed so hard. And apparently that's 100% a true story. It's been corroborated by others. And Prince apparently did make them all pancakes afterwards, and they were blueberry, and they were apparently delicious.
After it was all over, he took us in the house and served us pancakes.
And by the way, Charlie Murphy, rest in peace, he also died at 57 years old in 2017, but he died from leukemia, and that's a more complicated situation. We're not going to get into that. He's not on this list. And if for some reason you never saw that Chappelle Show clip, Charlie Murphy, True Hollywood Story, you definitely should. So, Prince, overall, he's actually pretty healthy. He was an epileptic as a child, which does give us a clue of numerous possible nutrient deficiencies since birth or early childhood. Already talked about that with King Charles. And he's widely said to have been a vegan, but that's not exactly true. A couple of chefs and restaurant owners have talked about how he did like certain animal products. He admitted that he did like yak's milk, ice cream, especially ice cream, and Alfredo sauce, among other non-vegetarian dishes. He did enjoy sweets, probably too much. That may be another sign of mineral deficiency, especially magnesium deficiency. And many people have commented that he didn't actually eat very much food. He kind of nibbled here and there and snacked a little bit, but he wasn't known as an eater. Whenever I hear that, or whenever I hear somebody's a picky eater, that usually to me is a clue that it's a digestion problem, that he had an underlying digestion problem. When food causes pain and discomfort, you tend not to eat as much food. And he was a workaholic, and I understand I'm a workaholic. I don't eat very much food either. And if you go a long time without eating and then you do eat, it can cause stomach pain, and that can cause you to eat even less food. It can be a vicious cycle. But despite the epilepsy as a child, that doesn't seem to have been a problem in adulthood. Although he was always afraid that he would have a seizure on stage, he never did. And his main actual problem that was probably the original cause of his drug dependence was hip and foot pain. The foot pain is probably from him performing in heels. And all performers, especially rock stars, it's a very, very intense thing. This is basically a high intensity workout night after night, year after year. Put that on top of his work schedule. He was prolific. I think he released 39 studio albums and 9 compilation albums before he died. And then a whole bunch of other stuff came out after he died. So he was busy. I couldn't find any record of him supplementing. He should have, for his pain. His pain was probably easy to fix. The hip pain, foot pain, pretty simple. I would tell him to wear some more appropriate footwear and take a bunch of minerals. And his diet wasn't the greatest, but it wasn't the worst either. Get off the gluten so you can absorb more nutrients. Take some minerals so you have less of a sweet tooth. But he did eat a lot of real food. He could have made his pancakes. He loved pancakes, apparently. He could have made his pancakes gluten-free. No big deal. Apparently, he preferred the real maple syrup as a sweetener rather than sugar. So he was somewhat health conscious here. He's definitely conscious of his weight and his appearance. And so I believe that if he was under proper guidance from somebody who knows anything about nutrition, he could have made some better choices, and he probably actually would have made those better choices. I doubt he wanted to be addicted to opiates. And besides a good solid supplement program, I would have given him lots of probiotics, lots of enzymes, and high doses of vitamin C. In this case, intravenous vitamin C. Let's do high doses of intravenous vitamin C to help him get off of the pain meds. And he didn't have any major medical issues, so this actually probably would have been easy. Ease his pain, or eliminate it. Could have been completely eliminated. Why not? My pain was completely eliminated all throughout my body. We do this all the time. Again, he died in 2016 here, so everything that's known in alternative medicine was known then. He didn't need any new breakthrough stuff. He had all the money in the world. He could have done all kinds of alternative treatments, but he didn't need them. He needed some basic stuff, some better nutrition, some IV vitamin C. We might as well do some IV chelation while he's there, help get whatever toxins and stuff are floating around his blood from the drugs. And that's pretty much it. There isn't that much more to say about Prince. No way he needed opiates. And whoever was treating him was outright negligent. And on top of that, as a Jehovah's Witness, he didn't like doctors anyways. He didn't want to do any surgeries or anything. And surgeries won't fix hip pain. So there was really nothing available from mainstream medicine that could have helped him. Unfortunately, those were the doctors he got. And he died as a result of his eventual addiction. Which brings us to number 6 on this list. Very similar case here. In fact, in the original video, I put them basically both together. This is Michael Jackson. He died on June 25th, 2009 at 50 years old. From a drug overdose, he was on many pharmaceutical drugs. Lots of us know this story already, but I dug out some more details. Of course, his doctor was actually given a short jail term when he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter for prescribing him the overdose. Jackson didn't go out and get street drugs here. This is from his doctor, Conrad Murray. And Conrad was apparently paid $150,000 a month to treat Jackson. With that kind of money, he could have gotten every single supplement in the world. Not that he would need that much. More is not always better. He could have gotten every alternative treatment in the world. But in this case, Michael Jackson's situation was pretty simple to me. Now, Jackson did have an obvious health problem here. As you can tell from pretty early on in his career, he had skin pigmentation problems and acne, pretty severe acne. The pigmentation problem is technically called vitiligo, which is basically caused by a fatty nutrient deficiency or fat malabsorption. In my opinion, his high grain diet was probably the primary cause. Gluten intolerance here. If he had come to me or anyone else in the nutrition field, hopefully they would have given him high doses of omega-3. I would have given him all 90 essential nutrients, but some extra selenium, vitamin E, got him off the gluten. Just like Prince, all of Jackson's favorite foods could have been made gluten-free, not a big deal. And in 2009, our cookbook was not available, Dr. Wallach's Cooking Without the Bad Foods, but Dr. Wallach was touring around the country, could have told him, go gluten-free. And this pigmentation problem could have been reversed within months. Typically is, when people are committed to the protocol. And Jackson was on a ton of drugs, including several antidepressants and sleeping pills, but he was also on a stomach acid lowering drug, a proton pump inhibitor. This is a huge problem here. So we already know he had a digestion problem. He had stomach pains and all this stuff. That's probably why he was on the stomach drug in the first place. It probably had a lot to do with his pain. He definitely would not have been absorbing nutrients properly, hence the vitiligo, possibly his depression, insomnia is a mineral deficiency or vitamin deficiency, or both. In this case, probably both. And when you shut the stomach down like that, it's going to cause even more problems because you need a strong stomach acid in order to absorb nutrients. In fact, I've made a video in the past called The 2 Worst Drugs. I'll put that video in the description. This is one of them. But stomach acid lowering drugs are one of the 2 worst drugs to me because you need a strong stomach acid to absorb many nutrients, including calcium, magnesium, B12, iron, vitamin C, folate, and others. And if you're deficient in those, that's also going to cause deficiencies in other nutrients. It's a real domino effect here. And you also need that to digest food properly. So he clearly had stomach problems and stomach pains, and this would not have helped the situation at all, even if it offered some temporary relief. And I wouldn't have needed $150,000. I could have fixed this probably with $1,000. Hopefully that doesn't sound too arrogant or something like that. But this is not difficult stuff here. This is not leukemia. He didn't need any actual treatments, in my opinion, although just like Prince, some high doses of vitamin C and some chelation, in my opinion, would have helped him get off the drugs a lot easier than cold turkey. And you shouldn't do cold turkey with these drugs anyways. He's on a list of antidepressants. Those should be weaned. Everyone agrees those are safest to wean. And just like Prince, besides the drugs, he wasn't really a party animal. He wasn't known to live a normal rock star life, with groupies and touring and all this stuff. He did tour and all that, but he lived a quiet life when he could, especially towards the end of his life. He became somewhat of a recluse, which to me is a lot healthier than being on the road. He had home-cooked food, personal chefs, and I'm sure he did overdo sweets and stuff like that, but he didn't have the worst diet in the world. Just like Prince, he was said to be a very picky eater, especially towards the end, which again is another clue of digestion problems, stomach problems, which we already know he had. And on top of the drugs, toward the end of his life, he was said to be drinking heavily. Some people said 6 bottles of wine a day, which is a lot, but I'm sure it was to cope with the pain. And once you're on all these drugs and stuff, you're not thinking clearly and all this, and clearly he was losing his mind a little bit. He may even have been using intravenous drugs at the end. But I'm close to positive that he never would have done any of these things if he weren't in such terrible pain, and if he had competent medical advice or nutritional advice, a proper supplementation program. Again, I couldn't really find anything, whether he supplemented or not, but it wouldn't have been absorbed on the stomach drug. And if he did have a serious gluten intolerance, which I think he did, then he definitely would have needed to get rid of that for the supplements really to take effect. And that would have been the main thing, honestly. If he did nothing else, he just went gluten-free, which was not a secret in 2009. This is not something that just came out new. I know it's kind of a fad now, but gluten has been known for a long time to cause stomach problems and cause malabsorption, especially if you're intolerant. I read books all the time from the 60s and the 70s, and they knew about this back then. So this information was out there. His doctor probably didn't know it, but that's what you get with a regular medical doctor. They can save your life if you're shot with a bullet or hit by a car, or if you have a life-threatening infection. But if you have a chronic digestion problem, chronic deficiency problem, a standard medical doctor is going to do nothing for you. So his constant pain and discomfort could have been easily alleviated to me. I would have given him a bunch of probiotics and enzymes. We would have done a digestion protocol with him before we started him on the 90 essential nutrients. And honestly, within a few months, his pigmentation should have been almost cleared up or well on the way to. A few more months after that, his skin should have been fine. By the way, a lot of people said he bleached his skin. I couldn't find any reference to that being true. And it would have been a cream, by the way, a skin lightening cream. Those do exist. He could have used them. It's possible. But really, he used makeup. He was using makeup at least since the 80s to cover up his patches because he was dark skinned. He had light patches, pigmentation problem. He used makeup. That's why he wore the glove as well, because you could see the vitiligo. There's plenty of pictures where you can see the vitiligo on his hands, on his arms, and definitely on his face. And this all could have been reversed early in his life. But even if he had stumbled upon this later in life, could have saved him. So it's the incompetence of his doctors here that really killed him. And by the way, Michael Jackson was also said to be a vegan, but it's not entirely true. Just like Prince, it looks like he wavered a little bit. He was a picky eater. He may have been vegan at one point, but we all know that he loved fried chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken, especially from the Freddie Gibbs cartoon video. If you haven't seen that, it's pretty funny as well.
Didn't believe Michael Jackson was coming to Gary, but he came though. And you know shit, that nigga had to come get him something to eat and shit, man. That motherfucker Mike came through and went to KFC, dog. And Mike bought all the motherfucking 100 barbecue wings, man. It took like a motherfucking hour to get his order out. And I swear this nigga was ordering extra crispy, motherfucking original, all that shit. But that nigga bought all the chicken for the people, my nigga. When he pulled up to the baseball stadium, he started throwing the chicken out the car and shit. The niggas was like, what the fuck? And Mike passing out chicken. Like, all you see is the motherfucking goddamn shiny glove throwing chicken out the window. Yeah, Mike loved Kentucky Fried Chicken. I know that shit for a motherfucking fact.
But apparently he did try to be vegan now and then, but he did love his fried chicken, which could have been done without gluten, by the way. Chef Norman makes a mean fried chicken that's not actually fried. It's slow cooked in butter, and it's gluten-free, and he's made it taste just like KFC. And Jackson apparently did also really enjoy Chinese food, which is not good. Lots of MSG and stuff in it, but mostly the gluten here is the problem. He liked candy. He liked M&Ms. They say for breakfast, he loved a freshly squeezed orange juice or a cup of hot milk. Just like Prince, a lot of people said he didn't eat very much, nibbled a little bit here and there. So he definitely wasn't eating healthy per se, but not the worst in the world. Just got to get off the gluten. They said he was a vegetarian who didn't like vegetables. So I guess he liked certain vegetables. Bit weird, of course. But again, stomach problems, this happens a lot. People become a very weird, picky eater. Some people speculate that he had an eating disorder to keep his figure slim and stuff. And yes, he was conscious of that. He didn't want to be fat. But I believe primarily he actually just had a digestion problem. That made him a super picky eater. That made him not want to eat much food. He played around with juices and stuff, and he could have been straightened out fairly easily. And I think we could move on to number 5 on this list, Andy Warhol, the artist. He's an artist I like. I actually think he was pretty brilliant for what he did. Some people have said his art was, a little bit childish, a little bit amateur. Maybe he cheated a little bit by overusing prints and by hiring other people to make his prints. But he had his reasons for doing so, and honestly, I respect him as an artist. But unlike the last 2 figures on this list, Andy Warhol made zero effort to be healthy. He was a sickly child. His face has acne scars on it, also signifying a digestion problem from early in life. And he did seem to actively do whatever was unhealthy. That was kind of his character. He ate junk food proudly, stayed up all night at his parties, did drugs, all while being very quiet. They say he's a very quiet guy. He's a very weird guy. That was the mystique that he put on. That was his character that he put on. And there are some people who actually blame an incident that happened in 1968. And by the way, he was 58 years old when he died, February 22nd, 1987. So again, we're still here in the modern era. Everything that was available in the alternative world was available to him. But in this case, if somebody like me told him what to do nutritionally, I highly doubt he would have done it. I don't think he would have done it at all. So ultimately, I actually think Andy Warhol was responsible for his own death in a way, blatantly neglecting his health. But if he wanted to, he had all the money in the world. You don't need a lot of money to reverse things nutritionally in most cases. You can spend some more money when it comes to cancer and stuff, but his problems were relatively simple, and we'll get there. He could have done it. And as I was saying, some people do actually blame his death on a shooting that happened in 1968, 20 years before he died. And of the 3 bullets shot at him, only one hit him. went through his spleen, stomach, liver, esophagus, and lungs. One bullet here. And so you might think it's a bit weird for him to die 20 years later of that. Well, I acknowledge this caused significant damage to him. He was very lucky to survive that. And actually, without modern medicine, he probably would have died from that, almost certainly. And given those injuries, he should have taken his health even more seriously, in my opinion. Some very heavy supplementation, nutritional support to heal as much as possible. But this is one of the events that led to him being very, very weak before the surgery that actually ended up killing him. So in 1987, he went in for gallbladder surgery. And I'm not the only one that's criticized the decision of his doctors to go through with the surgery. He was very weak. He was very unhealthy and sick. Most other people would be denied this surgery. They'd say, no, you got to go strengthen yourself. Stop staying up all night partying, doing drugs. Even though regular doctors don't know anything about nutrition and wouldn't have told him how to clean up his diet or anything like that, they would have said, you need to get stronger. And obviously, everyone's staying up all night partying. Even regular doctors know that's going to make you weak. So he was super weak. He was not prepared for surgery. And he was also not willing to be prepared for surgery. So he should have been denied surgery. Oh, you're in pain? Yeah, okay, I get it. But you can't have a major surgery like a gallbladder removal if you're this weak. It's dangerous. And some people have even criticized it that he could have done it earlier. He could have done it years earlier. He had been in pain for a long time. But Warhol did not like hospitals, and I don't blame him. He even said to his doctor, I'll make you a rich man if you can avoid the surgery. And unfortunately, his doctor didn't know how to make his gallbladder healthy. Apparently, when they removed his gallbladder, it fell apart in the surgeon's hands. It was that diseased. And I would assume his other organs were in very rough shape as well. All the more reason not to get the surgery in the first place. And I'll tell you what actually happened, but first, I would say that this would be extremely easy to prevent and reverse, even for an amateur like me. I don't have a medical degree. You come in with gallbladder pain, your first suggestion for me is to fast for 2 to 3 days. If you have any pain in any digestion organ, whether it's your pancreas, your appendix, your gallbladder, if you fast for 2 to 3 days, the pain will most likely go away, or at least it will greatly reduce. Next, I would give him high doses of enzymes. I would give him bile to take pressure off the gallbladder, because the gallbladder holds bile from the liver. It releases that bile into the intestines to absorb fat. I would have just given him a bile supplement, given him enzyme supplements, given him lots of probiotics, even if he kept doing drugs and stuff. This should have helped tremendously. And then, of course, I'd give him the 90 essential nutrients, which all of the organs need, and which there's nothing in his diet to suggest that he got any adequate nutrition at all. He ate almost entirely processed foods. And even if he refused to give those up, we could have pumped him full of tons of nutrients. He would have absorbed some of them. We could have done them intravenously. Again, he's got the money to do it. It's more expensive to do intravenous than it is oral supplementation. But this would have been straightforward. And then after he had been on the nutrients, in his case, probably for several months, but usually for at least 3 months, where I feel you're strong enough to go through with a gallbladder flush or a liver flush, same thing. Then we could have done that. We could have flushed the stones out. So guarantee he had stones in there. Of course. We could have flushed them out once he's strong enough, but the pain should have gone away well before then. After the fast, the digestion protocol is what I would have done. Put him on a bunch of nutrients, pain should have gone away. And if he's strong enough in a few months, we do a flush, boom, your gallstones are gone, you're good to go. So it would have been easy, even though I doubt he would have done any of those things, but if it was me sitting there and he's saying, hey, I'll make you a rich man if you could avoid surgery, I would say that's fantastic. You don't even have to make me a rich man because I could do this for less than $500 probably. And that's over several months. $500 is stretched over several months. This is not an expensive thing. So he goes in for the surgery, and the surgery did not actually kill him. He was conscious after that. He was awake. He was alive. He was in recovery. And there's a couple of different stories about this, but one of them said that the nurse watching over him actually fell asleep, and the tube that was giving him fluids actually put too much fluids in him. And that's apparently the cause of death, too much fluids. But whatever it was, there was malpractice here before the surgery and after the surgery. First one is him being able to get the surgery in the first place, should have been denied. Second one is post-operative care. And I, for one, am very interested in what he could have accomplished in his artistic career if he had lived at least a few more years, which I have every reason to believe he could have lived at least a few more years, even though he was very malnourished by all accounts. Still, he was only 58, and maybe his attitude would have changed a little bit, and who knows, maybe he would have said yes to the nutrition. I don't know. But we'll never know because he was killed by medical malpractice. Which brings us to number 4, Neil Armstrong, the astronaut. Said to be the first man on the moon, even though it wasn't something he liked to talk about. Once he got back, he stayed out of the public eye as much as possible. And even though the guy up there with him, Buzz Aldrin, said on at least 4 occasions publicly that they never went.
Why has nobody been to the moon in such a long time?
That's not an 8-year-old's question. That's my question. I want to know what I think I know. Because we didn't go there, and that's the way it happened.
What was the scariest moment of the journey?
Scariest. It didn't happen. It could have been scary. Circuit breaker. 1969, Neil Armstrong and I pulled off humanity's first extraterrestrial prank.
Went down and we watched you guys land on the moon.
No, you didn't.
What?
Because there wasn't any television. There wasn't anybody taking a picture. You watched animation. So you associated what you saw with...
I have very hazy memory.
And for more on that, you can check out my video series, Wag the Dog Theory, on wagthedogtheory.com, which has become a yearly conspiracy compilation that I put out on wagthedogtheory.com and on Rumble. You can search Wag the Dog Theory. And on the latest installment, number 4 from last year, I did a segment on fake space. So he was in it. But anyways, he's the oldest person on this list here at 82 years old. August 25th, 2012, he died from an elective surgery, meaning optional surgery. And here's what Dr. Wallach says about it.
So he goes in for his 82nd birthday, his physical, in a private hospital in New York, and they say, boy, Neil, that NASA program must be really something. You're 82 years old, you got the body of a 50-year-old. All your blood chemistry is perfectly normal. The only thing we can find on you is one coronary artery has a 3 millimeter wide, 30% blockage way down at the tip. Not something that's going to be a high risk for thrombotic coronary, that's going to cause a heart attack and death. Not in the right location to cause you an angina. If it was higher up in the artery, it might cause angina, but way down there at the tip, it's not going to cause angina. And, you're 8 years old, 5, 6, 8, 10 years from now, it's a progressive thing. You get worse and fill up that artery, and you could die on the way to the hospital from a heart attack. Why don't you let us do a bypass and put a stent in there? And he should have said, no! But instead he said, yes, sir, let's do it!
And we're not the only ones that say he didn't need his cardiac bypass surgery. And some doctors have commented that he seemed to have been rushed into it. There's no reason for it to happen that quickly. And it was only a partial blockage. It was not an emergency at all. And I actually couldn't find anything of any pre-existing conditions for him. I couldn't find if he had diabetes or anything like that. He wasn't severely overweight. He wasn't severely underweight. He wasn't a drug addict as far as I can find. He wasn't an alcoholic as far as I can find. Unlike Buzz Aldrin, who apparently became an alcoholic when they returned from the moon, in quotes there. I couldn't find anything about if Neil Armstrong supplemented, but from anything I could find about his diet, he seemed to eat real food. He seemed to enjoy relatively simple foods, beef, vegetables, pork with potato scallops, Canadian bacon, or female bacon, or back bacon, same thing, applesauce. So unlike Warhol and Prince and Michael Jackson, he didn't seem to eat much junk food, if any. There's no record of it. Seems like the kind of guy who likes a home-cooked steak and potatoes kind of meal. And even though he was 82 years old, he was still active. He was seemingly healthy for his age. Looks like he was doing pretty good. He was still doing periodic interviews, although he never seemed to really like doing interviews. And to me, there's every reason to believe that he could have lived several more years without any medical intervention, without anything being done about his minor blockage in his artery. And if he did want to clear the arteries without surgery, there are several options. The simplest and fastest would have been chelation therapy, IV or oral chelation. This is not hocus pocus here. It's been shown IV chelation can remove the plaque from the arteries in animals and humans. And that's exceedingly safe, practically no risk with chelation therapy, probably would have gotten a good result from that pretty quickly. And more gradually, he could have done it with proper nutrition, supplementation. And since his diet did not appear to be that bad, he wouldn't have needed any major diet changes. Would still have told him to get off the gluten, not use cooking oils, not eat burned steak or steak cooked over medium rare, and processed meats and stuff like that. All this can contribute to clogging the arteries and hardening the arteries. But if he did none of that, he probably would have lived at least a few more years. And remember, this was officially an elective surgery, so this was not an emergency. And the surgery itself did not actually kill him. During this type of a surgery, it's routine to insert a temporary pacemaker. As a nurse was removing it, he began bleeding profusely. And there are two criticisms here. I read at least one surgeon of 30 years experience saying he would never let a nurse do this. Why would a nurse do this? This is the surgeon's job. And second, once he did start bleeding, he should have been rushed back into the operating room. But instead, he was rushed into the catheterization lab. And nobody seems to have a good explanation of why he was brought into the cath lab. So this became an emergency, even though it never was an emergency. And he didn't actually die right away. He appears to have lingered for at least a week or more. And after this, the hospital quietly paid out $6 million to his family for the wrongful death. So medical malpractice here. That's why he's on the list. And honestly, he would have been on the list even if he died during the surgery, because the surgery was unnecessary in the first place. And it's only due to the ignorance and hubris of the medical world that they won't try simpler, safer things to clear arteries, such as chelation, dietary changes, and supplementation. And before we move on to the next person, I think it's worth pointing out that several of the people on this list had relatively stress-free lives. They had lots of money. And of course, money is one of the main stresses for most of us. Us lowly peasants who've got to rise and grind. Neil Armstrong did not have to rise and grind. This guy could have gone golfing and fishing and chilled out all day for the rest of his life if he wanted to. So I'm just saying, one of the major impacts on our health, stress, was greatly alleviated in Neil Armstrong. And some of these other ones chose to be stressed out. You know, Prince chose to be a workaholic. He could have relaxed if he wanted to. Warhol was actually pretty chill, right? He was very stoic, very quiet. But nonetheless, this is a factor that affects most of us. And some of these people was not a problem for them, which to me means that Armstrong probably could have lived even longer than the average person in his exact same situation at his exact same age. And of course, whatever healthy food is recommended, you can afford it. Supplements, you can afford it. Chelation, you can afford it. None of this stuff is expensive in the first place, although it might be a stretch for some normal people. All right, approaching the end of the list here. Number 3 is far more controversial than I originally thought. And he wasn't actually on this list originally. I put him on this list because whenever we post about him, and which we did recently, people kind of freak out. There's a lot of comments and I think misconceptions about this case. So let's get into it. Steve Jobs died at 56 years old, 2011, of a rare type of pancreatic cancer. He had been diagnosed 7 years earlier. And I think the first misconception that comes up about this case is you hear pancreatic cancer and you automatically think it's the scariest thing in the world. And it's true. Pancreatic cancer normally is one of the most aggressive, deadliest cancers out there. But a lot of people seem to have not really looked into his specific case. They just hear pancreatic cancer and that's it. Well, he had a specific type of pancreatic cancer, which is an islet cell tumor, which are far less common, only 2% of all pancreatic cancers, and have a much more benign nature. It's not as aggressive and scary as normal pancreatic cancer. And we don't know if the cancer had already spread to other organs, like his liver, at the time of diagnosis. Some people have debated this. It's just not clear whether it had spread already. And what people tend to also leave out is that this type of tumor that he had, first of all, is not well studied. There's not a lot of literature about it. And from what there is, it just doesn't seem that normal chemotherapy has much effect on this type of cancer. So a lot of people think that Steve Jobs denied conventional treatment and that's what killed him. He was an idiot. He should have just done surgery and radiation and chemotherapy or whatever. But if he had had honest conversations with his doctors at that point, they would have said, look, this is a rare cancer. We're not really sure. It doesn't appear to respond very well to chemotherapy. So he's not just an idiot for denying chemotherapy. And before I really go on here, this is the only cancer case here, except for maybe Napoleon, which is unclear. And I didn't want to put any cancer cases on this list because cancer is a lot more complicated. But Steve Jobs, this case, people have a lot of different opinions on it. And yes, this is a video about medical malpractice. Well, this case is not exactly that clear. And I've posted this before, but I posted it recently where Dr. Wallach is talking about Steve Jobs. So I'm going to play that for you here and look at some of the comments from TikTok and Instagram. And I'm not going to read the Facebook comments. They're too toxic in general. I don't know what's up with Facebook. I try not to read those comments, but we'll address some of the comments here.
Here's a very, very smart guy, Steve Jobs, billionaire, very smart technology, very smart marketing. He died 10 years before the average billionaire. He died at 56. Why is that? He's a vegan who did not take vitamins and minerals. He spent a lot of money for the top organic foods from all over the world to be shipped in by plane for him individually every day. He hired the top 5-star vegan chef to cook everything for him, which he did, and stir-fried everything and salad dressings and everything, and extra virgin olive oil and coconut oil. Gave him pancreatic cancer just like he shot him in the head. And then Steve Jobs made his second most terrible mistake. Instead of going to the Nicole Peninsula in Costa Rica in the Pacific coast of Central America and going and finding the oldest great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma, saying, Grandma, give me what you eat, give me the herbs you would take if you had bad cancer, he'd still be alive today. Instead, he paid millions of dollars to the top experimental cancer doctor to delay treating his other patients, spend his full time creating the ultimate panacea, kind of like the old days of the alchemist, to cure his cancer, and he killed Steve Jobs as sure as he shot him in the head.
So first of all, the claim that he denied conventional treatment and he did 100% alternative. That's not exactly correct to me. Yes, he did postpone conventional treatment for 9 months. And yes, that is a long time in cancer time. But some people say that he did homeopathy. There's no evidence that he did homeopathy. I can't find anything concrete about that. I also can't find anything if he supplemented or not. And I'll tell you what I would have done in this case, by the way, and what normal alternative practitioners in the cancer field would actually do. Remember, this was an uncertain prognosis. Either way, it's a relatively slow-growing tumor. It could have been cured surgically, apparently, if the tumor was removed prior to spreading, which we don't know that it had spread already at the time of diagnosis. It did spread later onto his liver. He did get a liver transplant because of that. And although you can live several years after a liver transplant, still, the chances are pretty slim of that. A lot of people don't do very well at all after any organ transplant, especially the liver. And you're put on anti-rejection drugs to lower your immune system so that your immune system doesn't respond to this foreign body in your body, which is someone else's organ. So it's a pretty grim situation after a transplant. We would like to avoid that if at all possible. I think he did have the potential to avoid that. I think he did have the potential to do alternative treatment properly, and I don't think he did it properly, in my opinion. So what he did do, and other people in his life did corroborate, he did do acupuncture, botanicals, which means herbs, basically, and dietary changes. First of all, Steve Jobs was mostly vegetarian for most of his life, and he was pure vegan sometimes. Some people say that he was a fruitarian, maybe for periods, but he wasn't that consistent on his diets either way. And what I could find about his diets is that he did have some weird habits. He was known for spending weeks eating the same type of food, such as apples or carrot salads, and then abruptly stopping or going on a fast. He was known for doing juices and some other stuff. So yeah, I'm going to say this is mostly vegan, and I would not call this an optimal diet by any means or any stretch of the imagination. He might have had some stomach problems here by being a picky eater, but I also don't have evidence of that. And other than using LSD, acid, and marijuana in the 70s, there's really not much evidence that he used other drugs, street drugs, or pharmaceutical drugs throughout his life. So he's relatively clean here. And after 9 months after his diagnosis, he did go to an experimental treatment in Switzerland in 2009, which involves using a radioactive isotope to attack the faulty hormone-producing cells of the body. So, of course, it's experimental. There was little, if any, evidence that this would work at all. Not sure why he opted for that route, but is what it is. And so what he ended up doing here was basically complementary medicine, meaning he did conventional and alternative. Even though he said no to the conventional up front, again, with an uncertain prognosis anyways on conventional treatment, it's not that dumb of a decision to be. And he ended up doing both. He continued with his diet changes and juices and fasts and stuff like that and botanicals and whatever. And he also did the experimental drugs and then eventually the liver transplant. So this is definitely not alternative all the way. It's complementary. So no matter what, we're all speculating here. There's no clear, concrete, like, oh yeah, if he should have just done the surgery right away, he definitely would have lived. There's nothing like that. We cannot speculate as to what would have happened in either direction. Reading an article here that says Steve would have benefited from more basic science, more clinical trials, right? More data about this specific type of cancer would have been helpful. It's a rare cancer to begin with, and there's very little data on it. So looking at some of the comments here on our posts, one person here said that the EMF from all that technology on his laps and stuff, that could have been a factor. Sure, I agree. It was all the fruit he ate. No, I don't think the fruit he ate caused it, but I definitely think he should have had a more balanced diet for sure. We're not a fan of extreme diets either way, whether it's veganism or carnivore. We are omnivores. Quite a few people said that he had AIDS. Okay, so I looked into this. Really could not find much other than this WikiLeaks article. And even they say, due to the contradictory dates, possible evidence of forgery, strong motivations for fabrication, and few motivations for a legitimate revelation, the images should not be taken at face value. Okay, so apparently WikiLeaks published some documents that said that Steve Jobs was HIV positive, but then they basically retracted it with this last sentence here. And there's no evidence that he had AIDS. But even if he did, AIDS, to me, is a fake disease. In fact, in my book, Fake Diseases, I have an AIDS chapter where I talk about this. And actually, one day I'll get around to doing a second edition because I went and read all the AIDS books that I could find. I have a whole shelf of AIDS books, and I'm even more convinced that it's a fake disease. And I don't mean that the symptoms don't exist. I mean, the symptoms are caused primarily by drug use, especially recreational drug use, especially poppers, nitrous inhalers, methamphetamines, other party drugs, are the primary demographic of people who got AIDS were drug users. Not every single one of them, but many of them are. And other unhealthy lifestyle choices. Alcohol, staying up all night partying, has nothing to do with sex. It's not sexually transmitted because it's not an infection. And the other associated illnesses like Kaposi's sarcoma, these are also signs of a weakened immune system caused by unhealthy lifestyle choices. Then you also have the problem of AIDS tests and how they're completely bogus, completely unreliable. I can't tell you how many people, healthy people with no symptoms on their questionnaire, and they're HIV positive. What does that mean? It means the tests are garbage. They tell you absolutely nothing, especially the PCR test, which was never intended to diagnose diseases, especially according to the person who invented them, Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize for creating that test, by the way.
If they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. If you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. It doesn't tell you that you're sick, and it doesn't tell you that the thing you ended up with.
So the tests are bogus. Plenty of people who have no symptoms at all are given a diagnosis of HIV positive. So even if Steve Jobs was HIV positive, it would mean nothing to me. Second of all, if you do have symptoms of so-called AIDS, they're caused by lifestyle factors and they can be reversed. Plenty of people have lived a long time with so-called AIDS. Magic Johnson is one of the best examples. He was the poster boy of AIDS for a while. He's still alive today because he made several healthy lifestyle choices and changes and used supplements and all kinds of stuff to boost his immune system so he doesn't have symptoms of a weakened immune system. Not going fully into the AIDS thing here. I'm just saying that these comments saying it was AIDS. Well, AIDS is a fake disease and AIDS does not kill you. What does kill you is an unhealthy lifestyle that diminishes your immune system. And if you take the drugs that are designed for AIDS, that's going to harm your immune system even more. And if you do take the drugs, they are very likely to kill you. In fact, when they lowered the doses, the standardized doses of AZT, the primary AIDS drug, when they lowered the doses, they started to live longer, and they actually kind of celebrated this in the media, like, oh, AIDS patients are living longer now due to better treatment. No, it was because they lowered the dose of the poisons that they were giving these people who are already immune compromised. Just saying, AIDS has nothing to do with it, and there's no proof that he had AIDS anyways. Next, a few people did say this. It was all intentional. He was a liability and a loose cannon to the establishment. Okay, they gave him cancer to silence him. Stop it. Worst assassination method ever. Someone here said, wait, he did not take vitamins and minerals? Yeah, if he took vitamins and minerals, there's no specifics about it. I can't find anything about it. Homeopathy is not vitamins and minerals. Juicing, yeah, you'll get vitamins and juices, but not minerals. If the minerals aren't in the soil, they're not in the juice, or the fruit, or the herb, or whatever. And herbs are medicines, so it looks like he did take herbs, but herbs are medicines, they're not nutrients. Nutrition and medicine are two different categories. In this case, I think he should have done both, actually, if you're talking about real alternative treatment. You don't just take vitamins and minerals. Vitamins and minerals have all kinds of anti-cancer benefits in prevention, especially. But I hope that our message never comes across that, oh, you just take vitamins and minerals if you have cancer. No way. In my book, Fake Diseases, I also have a cancer chapter, and I talk about many other things that I would do if I had cancer. Not just vitamins and minerals. I would take a vitamin and mineral supplement program very seriously, and I would add some extras to it. I would add lots of antioxidants. I would add lots of specific plant compounds, like medicinal compounds like fucoidan. I would use colloidal silver. I talk about here in this book that I would leave the city. I would go into the forest or to the mountains or to the ocean. You wouldn't hear from me. I wouldn't take my phone with me because EMF is, to me, a major contributor of ill health in general, disease in general, and cancer specifically. One of the many factors that add up to cancer. Nutrient deficiencies, poor food choices, processed foods. In Steve Jobs' case, it doesn't really look like he ate a lot of processed foods, which is very good. But yeah, EMF, stress, all kinds of things, lack of sleep. They sound minor, but you add all this stuff up, it becomes a serious problem. And actually, since I wrote this book, I would add a couple of more things. And by the way, if you want more on the alternative opinion about cancer, you should check out the Truth About Cancer podcast episode that I did. Because there are certain trends in the alternative world of what we would do. And for me, what I would add to this book now is if he had any dental fillings, which I'm not sure if he did have fillings or root canals or anything like that, but pretty much everyone in the alternative world agrees that those two things can be among the most toxic possible things and could contribute to cancer. And if you have cancer, you're going to do everything. You should do everything. Steve Jobs had all the money in the world, so he could have done everything in the alternative world. But even if you're not Steve Jobs, I'd mortgage my house. I'd sell my house if I had pancreatic cancer. I would have my fillings removed, although I don't have fillings. I don't have root canals, but I would get them removed if I had them. And if it were me talking to Steve, I would say, hey, Steve, you should go down to my friends at the American Biodental Clinic in Tijuana, Mexico. I'd say, Steve, I know you're a billionaire, but you should also use my discount code. Tell them that Not Us referred you, and you'll get $50 off if you spend $400 or more. And yes, that's a plug. You can use that code. You can tell them Not Us referred you. If you have dental work and you want to get your dental work removed, I trust the American Biodental Clinic with my friends and my family. In fact, we just went down recently to get my wife's fillings removed. And I would send Steve Jobs there as well. While he's there, you can get some IV vitamin C, some IV chelation, remove some of the junk and metals that might be in his blood. Get a hair analysis done, see what's up going on in his hair. What's missing, what's excessive, get blood work done, what's going on here, check your thyroid function. I would definitely get him on organs. Desiccated organs or real organs, I'd get him off this vegan stuff for sure. I'd be using organs, I'd be using bone broth, I'd be using heavy supplementation of the 90 essential nutrients, extra selenium, extra vitamin C, extra vitamin E and CoQ10. Like, we're not messing around here with pancreatic cancer. even though it's the rare form that's slow growing and whatever, doesn't matter. And since this happened in the modern times, he died in 2011, I would have said, man, you should go see Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. Because Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, he was still alive. He died in 2015. He kind of became famous for pancreatic cancer and for enzyme therapy. So you should understand that the pancreas produces some hormones, produces insulin, but it also produces digestive enzymes. And enzyme therapy for cancer is not new either. It's like 100 years old, meaning high doses of enzymes. This would take pressure off of the pancreas, and we'd be supporting the pancreas at the same time because we're giving them the 90 essential nutrients. Your organs all need a bunch of nutrients, especially selenium and a bunch of nutrients. So we're going to do that. We're going to support it with nutrients, but you also want to take pressure off of the organ itself. Like if you have a gallbladder problem, I mentioned earlier with Andy Warhol, you want to take bile to take pressure off of the job of the gallbladder. In this case with pancreas, take pressure off of the pancreas by consuming tons of enzymes. No upper limit here. We would throw enzymes at him big time. And probiotics. Everything. We're doing everything here. You got pancreatic cancer. It's not a huge exhaustive list, but it's a lot, and he should do it all. And enzyme therapy has been used for cancer because specifically with protease enzymes, those are the enzymes that digest protein. The theory here is that when your enzymes are not being used to digest food, they do other things in the body. Enzymes do all the work in the body anyways. We need vitamins and minerals to be cofactors for enzymes, but enzymes are the ones that do the work, actually. And in this case, not only do they help digestion, like they're required for digestion, but tumors are also basically coated in protein. Your body takes cancer and it coats it in protein. The theory is to stop it from spreading. But once it's in that tumor, once it's in that protein coating, your body can't get to it anymore. So part of the theory here with the enzyme therapy for cancer is that the protease, high protease enzymes, means high doses of protease enzymes, can dissolve that tumor so that the body's immune cells can now actually get to the cancer and deal with it and eradicate it. And remember, all of this goes together. You don't just do enzymes. You don't just do vitamins and minerals. You definitely don't just do acupuncture and herbs. You do all of this stuff at once. And there is more. Like I said, in the cancer episode, there's more that you could do. And that's what would truly be called alternative medicine to me when it comes to cancer. The normal stuff, the vitamins and minerals and eating a good balanced diet without processed foods, that should prevent cancer. But once you have cancer, you need to do way more than the basics. And in my cancer chapter of fake diseases, I would also add hydrogen water. And yes, I do sell hydrogen water. I'm a distributor for the Zontos Water Company. And I picked this company because I am convinced that they are the best in the world. And yes, this is a plug here for you listeners, but this is also genuine. If you type in hydrogen water and cancer, you're going to see a ton of stuff come up. I couldn't find anything specifically with pancreatic cancer, and I'm definitely not going to find anything with his specific type of rare pancreatic cancer. But there's so much, even just on a regular Google search. This has been studied for decades, not with any specific machines. This is hydrogen gas, which can be inhaled or can be added to water. This has been studied by major institutions. There's over 2,000 double-blind studies about this. It's been studied by governments. Like, this is mainstream stuff now. This is the best of modern medicine, in my opinion. Besides the advanced surgical methods and whatever, this is one of the best things that's come out of modern medicine, is hydrogen water. And since it's been studied so extensively for cancer, absolutely, Steve, you're on hydrogen water all day, every day. And the Zontos company was just getting started in 2011, so I don't think I could have recommended this to him. But now, anybody who has cancer, this is part of my recommendation. And this costs more than vitamins and minerals, but it's not really breaking the bank. They have two models for sale currently. One's a bottle top and one's a direct feed. Both of them are under $5,000. So this is on the cheap end when it comes to cancer treatment. I don't know if you know how much chemotherapy costs and surgeries and stuff. Whether or not insurance pays for it, it's very expensive. So this is one of the most expensive things that I ever recommend, but definitely when it comes to cancer, you're getting hydrogen water. And of course, any of you, you can check it out in the description, zontoswater.com/notus. That is my link. I have made 4 recordings now with the owner and founder of Zontos. Some of them are audio, some of them are videos. There's tons to say on hydrogen water. You've probably heard about it already. Other people are talking about it too. Even though this has been researched for decades, it's just kind of hitting the market to become a fad on its own recently. And I don't mean fad in a bad way. I mean, it's gaining hype, and that's good. And I believe this is going to be here to stay. Hydrogen water is not going anywhere, in my opinion. Alkaline water was a fad in the sense that, you know, it came and then kind of went, and I don't recommend alkaline water. Steve Jobs looks like he might have believed in alkaline water, since he did believe in the juicing and fasting and all this stuff too. He might have fell for that. But either way, you guys should know, I waited 10 years in this business to stand behind any water company. I've sold water filters before, but I've never said, this is the best filter in the world. You got to get this. If you're going to get any filter, you got to buy this filter. I never said that. And I was looking actively because people ask me all the time, what is the best water in the world? Well, now I do believe that if you put filters aside, you need to put filtered water in the hydrogen water machine. So assuming it's clean to begin with, my opinion is the Zontos hydrogen water machine is the best in the world. And they can prove it. They have an excellent ppm and an excellent half-life, and the machines have performed for up to 14 years. The oldest machines are still performing, so we don't even know how long they last, which means they're excellent quality. Most of the other hydrogen water machines out there, first of all, good luck even finding the ppm or the half-life. Most of the time it's not spoken about. Most of the time it's not published. Second of all, that ppm and half-life tends to deteriorate very quickly because most of these machines do not last very long. They might produce 3 ppm at the beginning for the first week or two, maybe a month, but that's not good enough to me. I want a machine that's going to perform at top quality for a very long time if I'm spending my hard-earned money on this. And Zontos tells you right here on the website that they do generate a ppm of between 2.5 and 3.5 with a half-life of 2 hours. Again, good luck finding companies that even publish the half-life. And other companies have been pitching me on their hydrogen water too. I'm having to kind of wrestle with them to find out the ppm, and I'm not finding out the half-life from them. And this is them trying to get me as a distributor, and they won't even tell me the half-life, or maybe they don't even know the half-life. Kind of embarrassing to me. And believe it or not, Zontos is nowhere near the most expensive unit. They can get way pricier. And there's other benefits to the Zontos model, but I'm not going to continue to go into this, just letting you know that's what I think the best water in the world is at this moment, especially for its therapeutic value, not just with cancer, but with basically every body system that has been studied. They're finding benefits with hydrogen water. So Steve Jobs would be on the hydrogen water to me, if he's dealing with me. And yeah, so some people are saying here also that he was a fruitarian. I don't really see evidence of that. Can't find details about that. Some people said he had hepatitis B. To me, that's also a fake disease. It's also in the AIDS chapter. I talk about hepatitis and HSV and HPV. And yeah, there's very similar comments here on TikTok, and I think we've cleared up most of these. He's in uncharted territory with a rare cancer. I would have done far more than acupuncture and herbs and juicing. Not enough. You need a varied diet. You need tons of nutrients. And I would do everything else that I talked about and even more. This would be full-time. There's a phrase worth remembering, and that is 2-year turnaround. When it comes to cancer specifically, but many problems in general. You come in with awful health, you should expect a 2-year turnaround. You have to lose 100 pounds, you should expect a 2-year turnaround. It's not something that happens in a month or a week or 6 months, typically. It takes time to change habits. It takes time to saturate tissues with certain nutrients. Just don't expect miracles overnight. It usually takes years and decades for a problem to develop, especially cancer. And it's going to take years, most likely, to get to 100% full recovery. So this is not a simple case. This is not a clear-cut case of medical malpractice either. I just really thought I should put him on the list here because apparently there's a ton of misconceptions about Steve Jobs, what exactly he did when he was diagnosed, what he could have done that might have been better. And to me, honestly, even if he did chemotherapy or radiation or surgery or whatever, he still should do everything else that I talked about. That would be complementary medicine there. It's fine if he wants to choose that. Or if he wants to do 100% alternative, he better be serious. Let's do everything. And I think we can leave it at that. Could he have lived longer? I don't know. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that at this point. He did live for several years after his diagnosis, which is honestly pretty good any way you slice it. I think he tried. I don't think he was negligent or anything like that. Could have done better, sure, but for every one of us alternative people, there's literally millions of people who need help. So the pool is pretty small of people he could have gone to. And it's far more likely that he's going to run into someone who's not completely qualified to deal with cancer, whether that's conventional or alternative. So maybe he shouldn't have even been on this list, but I hope you found it interesting. And that brings us to number 2 on this list. Alexander the Great. On the original list, he was actually number 1. And I had him as number 1 because he's such an important figure. But the new number 1 actually I think is more dramatic. So we'll get there. But Alexander the Great, it isn't clear what exactly happened to him. But he was very ill in his last days. He was on the road, so to speak, on his war campaign. And there are different opinions about what was wrong with him. Some think he had sustained a bunch of different injuries from all these battles, and that's what knocked him down. Some think he was poisoned, which is possible. Some think that he had an infection, which is also possible. Any of these are possible. And it actually could be a combination of all 3 or 2 of these factors. And his doctors tried all kinds of things, although the details are vague. I don't have a list of compounds that they gave him, but just like some of the other cases on this list, we can assume that they gave him a bunch of concoctions and herbs and all kinds of stuff. Whatever that was in their toolbox, they probably gave it to Alexander. They might have been scared to lose their heads if they didn't do everything possible to save him. So overzealous is probably what they were. But whatever they did, the historical account has it that Alexander's body did not begin to decompose for 6 days after his death. And he was 32 years old, by the way, so prime of his life. And I know a lot of my followers will be into hidden history, and I've made videos on hidden history and stuff, and I like Anatoly Fomenko, and so there's actually disagreement on who Alexander was and when he lived. You know, Fomenko thinks that he was an Albanian that lived in much more modern times, like Renaissance times. But regardless, whoever he was, whenever he lived, it's definite that he was a tough person. This was a tough dude. So to me, whether it was alcoholic liver disease, as some have supposed, or whether it was poisoning or an infection or accumulated injuries, he might have survived, regardless of what medical treatments were given to him. Again, this is one of the toughest humans ever. He might have survived if he hadn't been prematurely declared dead. And they say it's because they used breathing back then instead of your pulse. So he could have had extremely shallow breathing in a comatose state here. It seems to be what it was. He was in a coma. And it seems clear that he was still alive for 6 days out there. So if they didn't leave him to die, he might have lived. In the week before his death, he was mentioning chills and sweats and exhaustion and fever. He could have had typhoid. He could have had another infection. He could have survived this. And just like some of these other cases, his doctors might have pushed him over the edge with all kinds of ridiculous treatments. We don't really know, but I do know that if you leave a body out in the sun for 6 days, they're going to die regardless. So I think we can safely call this medical malpractice. Obviously, they didn't have IVs and stuff to give him fluids and a feeding tube, right? He's in a coma, sure, but I think this guy would have lived. This is not a mere mortal here. He might have lived. And I can't really blame his doctors for being incompetent here and being able to help him, but yeah, being pronounced dead when you're not dead, you're being put in the category of medical negligence to me. And before we get to the number one spot, I just want to remind you that you can find everything that I do on my website, notusbooks.org, including all the books that I've written, including Fake Diseases and our cookbook, as mentioned already, and the books that I've helped publish. Got hundreds of book reviews on there as well. Most of them are about health. There's also an archive of this podcast on the website. You could download episodes there for free. And of course, in case we get taken down again, which did happen in the past, that's why there's an archive. You can always find it on notusbooks.org. There's also audiobook versions of my books. They're free on YouTube and podcasts. You can find all of that on the website. And you can find all the social media channels that I have. We're most active on Instagram. But you can find everything there on the website. It's also in the description as well. All right, and we have finally arrived at the number one case here on this list. What I think is one of the most egregious cases of medical malpractice of all time. And what I'm calling the number one case for a famous person. This is President George Washington, the first president of the United States. He died on December 14th, 1799, age 67 years old. And as the story goes, 2 days earlier, he was out on horseback, supervising farming activities from late morning until 3 in the afternoon. The weather shifted from light snow to hail and then rain. Upon Washington's return, it was suggested that he change out of his wet riding clothes before dinner. But known for his punctuality, Washington chose to remain in his damp attire. Which I respect, you don't want to be late. And in 1799, to be fair, changing clothes probably wasn't the easiest thing in the world. It's not like he was wearing a t-shirt and shorts here. They wore pretty elaborate clothing in that time. Probably had 3 or 4 shirts on, or a vest, buttons, all kinds of gear. But that decision to stay in those damp clothes did cost him. The next morning brought 3 inches of snow and a sore throat. Despite feeling unwell, Washington went to the hanging wood area on the east side of the mansion after the weather cleared to select trees for removal by enslaved workers. He's still out there going to work. He's cut down some trees. Throughout the day, it was observed that Washington's voice became increasingly more hoarse. That evening, as typical for most evenings, Washington read from the newspapers with his secretary and his wife. Due to the increased throat irritation, Washington asked his secretary to complete the reading. After retiring for the night, Washington awoke in a terrible discomfort at around 2 in the morning. His wife Martha was concerned about his state and wanted to send for help. However, having just recovered from a cold herself, Washington would not allow his wife to leave the comfort of their room. Gentlemen till the end. When his housemaid came to light the fire at daybreak, Martha sent for the secretary, who rushed to the room. There he found Washington in bed, having difficulty breathing. The secretary, whose name is Tobias Lear, sent for George Rawlins, an overseer at Mount Vernon, who, at the request of George Washington, bled him. Lear also sent for Dr. James Craik, the family doctor and Washington's trusted friend and physician for 40 years. While waiting for the doctor's arrival, Rawlins extracted a half pint of blood. And Washington was happy about this, as he believed that it cured him of past ailments. We'll get to his past ailments later. Washington was also given a mixture of molasses, butter, and vinegar to soothe his throat. The mixture was difficult to swallow, causing Washington to convulse and nearly suffocate. As the morning progressed, Washington did not feel any relief. Martha requested that Lear send for a second doctor. At 9 in the morning, the doctor arrived, examined Washington, and produced a blister on his throat in an attempt to balance the fluids in Washington's body. They bled him a second time and ordered a solution of vinegar and sage tea prepared for gargling. At 11 a.m., they sent for a third doctor. At noon, an enema was administered. No idea how that was expected to help here. But there was no improvement in Washington's condition, obviously. Washington was bled for the 4th and final time. It was later reported that a total of 32 ounces of blood was extracted during the last bleeding. And this total bleeding is said to be about 40% of his blood, about 2 liters or half a gallon. The physicians put their head together and tried to come up with what to do next, and then they administered an emetic. Remember, that's to induce emesis or vomiting, to make him vomit. though this was without beneficial results. Despite all of this, or maybe because all of this, George Washington's condition worsened. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Washington called Martha to his bedside and asked that she bring his 2 wills from the study. After review, he started talking to Lear and telling him, "I don't think I'm going to make it," basically. "My breath cannot last long. I believed from the first that the disorder would prove fatal. So as soon as he started feeling sick, he thought he was going to die. Asked him to arrange his military letters and papers, arrange the accounts, and settle the books. At 5 in the afternoon, Washington sat up from bed, dressed, and walked over to his chair. He returned to bed within 30 minutes. Washington said to his doctor, "I am not afraid to go." He thanked all 3 doctors for their service. At 8 o'clock, 9 more blisters and cataplasms were applied. A cataplasm is like a poultice, like a cloth soaked in something and applied externally. At 10 at night, Washington requested to be decently buried. Between 10 and 11 at night on December 14th, 1799, George Washington passed away. And this was only 2 years after he finished his presidency, by the way. And there was more in here too. When that 3rd doctor showed up, they gave him calomel, which is mercury chloride, and they may have even given him some other concoctions. But before I talk about what could have been done differently, I think it's worth going over his past health problems, because I did post this recently on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. And there was quite a bit of comments like, "Oh, but he was unhealthy already," and "Oh, he was a heavy smoker." And I really don't know what any of that has to do with this situation, but let's go over it. He apparently had smallpox at one point. He became very sick during the French and Indian War in 1755. He had terrible teeth, inflamed gums, lost most of his teeth. He wore dentures. So we can see clues here of several deficiencies and problems. He famously had rosy red cheeks in his portraits, which to me speaks of gluten intolerance, excessive grains, probably excessive alcohol as well. While he was president, he had a very large and painful tumor on his thigh, which prevented him from walking or sitting, apparently. And they did remove that tumor, but a similar but smaller one reappeared 2 years later. In the spring of 1790, he became very ill with probably influenza or pneumonia. And for that one, he nearly lost his hearing. So he does have a history of past illnesses, but Washington tried to educate himself on health and medicine. And in America at that time in the 1700s, there were several textbooks published on herbs and stuff. And he actually had at least 9 medical books in his library. And there's other reports. As a kid, he may have had diphtheria, which is an infection, can be serious, poses a risk of suffocation. He could have had tuberculosis. During that French and Indian War, he probably had dysentery, which is an infection of the intestine, causing violent diarrhea, basically, where you die from dehydration. Could have had malaria, tonsillitis, carbuncle, which is a bump on his face in this case. Could have been a tumor, could have been cancerous, we don't know. So he was not the healthiest individual. And although they didn't have processed foods in his day, he was said to be an eater. He was said to feast on everything from roast beef and fish to tarts and other desserts. He loved cherry pie and nuts and cakes. Trifle, which is a kind of custard and whipped cream layered dessert. He loved his spirits, especially beer and wine. Lamb, mutton, melon, ice cream, pickles, mashed sweet potatoes. This guy was a foodie. But all of this, his food habits, his smoking, his drinking, his past health problems, I don't really think any of this is relevant. Some say he may even have had anthrax at one point. Like there's a lot, obviously, of people talking about George Washington. He's a very famous person. And I don't think any of this is relevant because the man had a cold. He wore wet clothes in December. He went to a dinner party in those wet clothes. He got sick. It seems extremely simple. And I don't know why a lot of people are hesitant to accept this very simple reality here. Some of the comments I got on this post, but it's a virus, it's got nothing to do with his wet clothes. Nonsense, guys, come on. Last weekend, I fell into the river here in Houston, Texas, and it's hot out, it's summer. And after about 30, 40 minutes in those wet clothes, I felt like I was getting sick. I had to have a shower and change out of them. This is December here in Virginia. 100% that's what made him sick. And if the mercury chloride and all these other purgatives, emetics, whatever blisters they gave him, if that didn't kill him, the bleeding certainly did. And some modern doctors have commented that, oh, we could have intubated him, put a tube down his throat to bypass the swelling. Oh, we could have performed a emergency tracheectomy where they poke a hole in your throat, again, to bypass the swelling. But he did not die of suffocation. I don't know why everybody is skipping over this point. He seems to have died of blood loss and fluid loss in general, electrolyte loss. You bleed him, you purge him, you give him enemas. That's how you die. In my opinion, he needed more fluids, not less. And of course, as Freemason and first president, he is entitled to the finest medical care there is. And just like some of those other cases on this list, his doctors, I think, did way too much. I think they should have shown up and boiled a pot of water under a flame, let him take a steam bath with a blanket over his head, soak in the steam. They could have used some essential oils, sure. They could have used some herbs, sure. There was plenty available. He lived in a mansion. He was well off. I'm sure he had some herbs on site. But even if he didn't, you don't need a medical textbook to tell you to do nothing. Do nothing at all. This man was bled to death over a cold. You could have done nothing. Let him rest. That's it. Rest up, sleep. Yes, you're going to be uncomfortable for a couple of days. Give him some water. Give him some juice or some broth. Even let him drink his beer. It wouldn't even matter to me. Just leave him alone. Don't bleed him to death. Don't blister him to death. Don't nearly choke him to death with vinegar and butter and molasses. Don't give him enemas. What the heck is an enema supposed to do here? He didn't need any fancy medical intervention or treatments at all. Herbs might have eased his suffering a little bit, but he didn't need any herbs. We've all had a cold. Can you imagine last time you had a cold? It's been a long time since I've had a cold, but I'm picturing like, Mom, I don't want to go to school. You know, I'm feeling sick. And then she bleeds me to death, bleeds out 40% of my blood. Oh, that'll be good for you. Come on. I know they had some wacky ideas back then about the humors and stuff, but it just seems insane to me that you can kill a man over a cold, especially one of the most important men in history, certainly in American history. When he was alive, he was one of the most important people in the country, but his doctors just couldn't leave well enough alone. Couldn't say, hey man, you know, you're going to need to just rest up next couple days, have a hot bath or something. Nope. Got to give him mercury, got to blister him with Spanish fly, remove 80 ounces of blood. It's wild to me. This is definitely one of the wildest cases of medical malpractice in history. Pretty much everybody agrees that his doctors killed him that day. And I definitely don't think you need a medical degree to understand what happened here. Whether you believe in viruses or not doesn't really matter. Time and heat and fluids would be the main treatment protocols, in my opinion, whether we're talking about 1799 or 2024. Despite everything that was given to him, he was still breathing. He didn't suffocate, which was the main concern there, that, you know, his throat was so inflamed that he might suffocate. Well, he didn't. Instead, he was killed at 67 years old over a simple cold. And that is our entire list here, guys. I know that people get sensitive about these obituary posts, but they are very informative. Once somebody dies, the case is closed, and then we can learn something from it. I don't think any of us want to go like anybody did on this list here, so good to examine what went wrong in these cases. If you have any ideas on famous people or not famous people, death cases that you'd like me to go through, I'm happy to go through them. For many years, Dr. Wallach has used obituaries to make his case and build the picture that good nutrition and good health will prevent most of these problems in the first place. And when you do have a problem, many times medical treatment is not appropriate. Many times medical treatment will kill you much earlier than you would have died. Medical treatment is useful in a real emergency, When you are shot with a bullet or hit by a car, you want to go to the hospital. Hopefully they don't put their dirty hands in you. If you do have a life-threatening infection, now modern medicine does have many very effective treatments for that. They can help you in extreme cases, but for the most part, the vast majority of diseases can be avoided in the first place with good habits and good nutrition. And once you have them, usually there is a nutritional protocol to reverse it before it becomes a true emergency. And of course, we have tons of other content attempting to teach you these things, these strategies, these concepts, lots of other podcast episodes, thousands of posts on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube videos. I've written books. Of course, remember, you can find everything that I do, all of my books, all the books that I've helped publish, all the audiobook versions of my books, all of that on my website, notusbooks.org, which is in the description as well. And there's also an archive of this podcast, so you can download the old episodes for free. If we do ever get taken down again, you should know notusbooks.org has the permanent archive. And you can support this podcast directly through Patreon if you like. We don't get paid to make content. We get a tiny little bit of ad revenue from podcast. But if you do sign up for the Patreon for just as little as $1.99 a month, you do get all the podcast episodes at least 1 week early, sometimes several weeks early if I'm on top of things. We also do a weekly Zoom meeting, other supplement distributors and I, where we talk in pretty deep detail about specific diseases, specific products, and we always do at least one case study per week. And the only place that's available is on Patreon, unless you actually join the meeting. In any case, I appreciate you listening, appreciate you being here with me. Once you know this stuff, you can't really unknow it, so hopefully we can change the nutritional landscape out there, prevent most of these problems in the first place, and have some kind of an idea of what to do when your doctor says, hey, you need your gallbladder removed. Hey, we need to purge you. No, they don't really say that anymore. Hey, we need to bleed you to death. No. Avoid medical treatment when you can, but you got to know what you're doing in the first place, and that's what we're here for. Stay tuned for the next one. Let me know any ideas you do have. I do read almost all the messages. Can't read all the comments, there's too many of them, but emails, Instagram messages. If the message is for me, the people who help me leave it for me. I do appreciate feedback. We do make this content for you, so whatever you want to see done on here, I will consider it. Remember to check the description if you do need your fillings removed, your mercury fillings and your root canals and all that alternative dentistry. You can check out my friends at the AmericanBioDentalClinic.com. You can get a free consultation there, see what you're in for. You can use my discount code by telling them that Not Us referred you and get $50 off if you spend $400 or more. Check out ZontosWater.com for the best hydrogen water machine on the market and for a lot of research that they do have there on their website. I encourage you to look into the hydrogen water. And to get yourself a health protocol, you can actually check out our website and contact one of our coaches. On the contact page, we do have a questionnaire. You can fill out the questionnaire, send it to one of the coaches, and they will respond with a protocol. We're going to give you supplement recommendations. We do get a commission if you buy those supplements, but we'll also give you the food recommendations. All this is free. The advice is free. You don't have to take it if you don't want. But you'll get our food advice, and you'll get anything specific that we think is necessary for you in your specific case. And that about does it for today, guys. I appreciate you once again. Stay healthy, my friends. Until next time.